Rising. Happy Tuesday, and we've got a big show to get to today, so let's just start it off. Hello, Brianna.
Hello, Robbie. First up on the docket, 84-year-old Andrew Lester has been arrested in the shooting of Ralph Yarl, the 16-year-old who accidentally visited the wrong address last week. Kansas City prosecutors have charged Lester with 2 felony counts of first-degree assault and armed criminal action, according to police documents obtained by CNN. Lester has admitted to firing at Yarl through his glass front door multiple times because he thought the teen was trying to break in. No words were exchanged before Lester opened fire on the teen. The 84-year-old claims he decided to shoot after seeing Yarl pull his door handle, a claim Yarl has disputed, according to CNN. Lester told police he was, quote, scared to death of Yarl due to the boy's size.
Well, the 16-year-old was thankfully discharged from the hospital yesterday and is recovering at home after receiving care for gunshot wounds to the head and arm. Family and former teachers described Yarl as a gentle soul and gifted student and musician who wants to study chemical engineering in college. A GoFundMe for the teen has raised over $2.5 million. So first, I want to say it's just extraordinary and great news that he was discharged from the hospital so quickly after suffering a gunshot wound to the head. Which
Yes.
I'm sorry, there's no way you can describe to me a gunshot wound to the head and
That
have it
isn't
not
serious,
sound very serious.
And then the subsequent gunshot wound that he received after he had already been struck the first time, and then having, the reporting we did yesterday about how he had to go up to 3 houses or 3 different people before he was able to get aid. It sounds like he went through such a trial. It is such good news that he is able to be home and recovering.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's incredible what modern medicine can do for shot in the head again, and not only survive but be good enough to go home the day after. Obviously, there's some degree of arbitrary nature with Gabby Giffords was shot in the head. It has recovered, but it took years of medical procedures, therapy to regain speech and things of that nature. So it can be totally hit or miss, I guess.
So I know that some people were wondering why this charge and not attempted murder. Of course, there were people protesting before the charges came down, upset that charges hadn't come more quickly. Now that they're in, I did see some initial pushback asking why not the attempted murder charge. Apparently in Missouri, these charges give the highest possible sentences, and also the attempted murder is a more difficult charge to prove, and that's partly why this was chosen. It doesn't seem to be an instance where there's any attempt to lowball any of the charges or accountability against the shooter here. But what do you make of the shooter's claim that the boy, that Ralph was trying to open his door and that justified him shooting him twice?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a claim that has to be explored. I don't think it would justify necessarily shooting at him anyway if it were true. Especially
with no words exchanged. It's hard to imagine that at no point, even if not after the first shooting, before the first shooting and then after.
It was broad daylight as well, right? This is not the middle of the night where he's hearing someone trying to mess with the doorknob and get in.
And Yarl says, of course, that he did not touch the door handle, that he rang the doorbell, and that's when he was shot.
So obviously, Yarl says he didn't even do that. So there's a dispute here.
And thank goodness Yarl, imagine if Yarl were incapacitated or deceased and wasn't able to advocate for himself. I think a lot of people might pretty readily accept the shooter's version of events here. And of course, we'll continue to see this play out. But
like I said yesterday, I believe in armed self-defense. I think people should be able to use their firearms to protect themselves if they're actually in danger or they're defending their property. This person did not have a reasonable impression that was the situation here, given that the doorbell was ringing, it was broad daylight. The milkman, the letter carrier, the package delivery person, people can ring your doorbell. Ringing the doorbell is a way to indicate, hey, I'm not robbers don't ring doorbells. People who are coming to hurt you don't ring the doorbell. So that was a very wrongful impression. This is a very old man.
He's 84. That's right.
Shouldn't.
Well, this is a really interesting issue. And so there's this other case that also happened over the weekend that really puts into context that this is not an isolated incident and what burden we put on victims versus people who own guns to assess the gravity of a situation, the potential danger in a situation, is very subjective and fraught.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that case a little bit. This is a tragedy, very similar. A 20-year-old New York woman has died. She did not survive after being shot by a homeowner after the car she was riding in turned into the wrong driveway. According to the Times-Union, Kaylin Gillis and 3 of her friends were looking for another friend's house in rural upstate New York when they mistakenly turned into the driveway of 65-year-old Kevin Monahan.
While the car was in the process of backing out of the driveway, Monahan came onto his porch and opened fire on the vehicle, killing Gillis. Lacking cell service, her friends were forced to drive 5 miles away to a neighboring town in order to call 911. However, emergency services were tragically unable to save her. Monahan has refused to cooperate with the police. He's been charged with second-degree murder.
And this goes to show again how random it is. You can get shot and die immediately. You can get shot, and if you get medical attention very quickly, you can be okay. It's.
Yeah, and the fact of the matter, I mean, imagine how many times have you been in a car looking for an address, driving through an unfamiliar neighborhood, you hit an unexpected dead end, you have to make a turn, you use someone's driveway to turn around. This is something I would gather every American has experienced. You have turned around at some point in your life in somebody else's driveway. I'm a non-driver, but as a passenger, I certainly have. And I will say, I have experienced a small amount of trepidation. Is someone going to think I'm coming to their house? I mean, like there has been that anxiety and jokes made in the car in these moments. Oh, is someone going to be mad at us for being in their driveway? There's a racial component to that as well. But the idea that this car full of young people had a passenger basically sniped at in a passenger seat because their car simply entered a stranger's driveway, it's galling, it's horrifying. It's the kind of thing that you think you're a little bit paranoid for thinking as you're driving around and trying to live your life. And then you see instances like this, and you really have to ask yourself what message we're sending where folks feel so afraid, not afraid of someone banging on their door, not afraid of someone getting in their face on the street, not afraid of anything that I think a normal person would consider to be an escalation or threat of violence, but the kind of mundane activities that even if they caused you pause, even if you said, it's late and there's someone in my driveway, while your first action would be to shoot and do something that's so irreversible as to use deadly force against a stranger, knowing that you have the potential to take their life.
I mean, the solution here is to prosecute these people. These were wrongful acts with tragic results, and you should not be allowed to you're not allowed to be able to do this. You can't just fire randomly at people for pulling into your driveway or ringing your doorbell. So these people should be prosecuted, and they should suffer the consequences of their actions. It was in the first case, I think you were saying the charge would end up having a prison sentence of between 10 and 30 years, and this man's 85, so it's going to be the rest of your life in prison if you're convicted of that.
Right. Well, this man is in New York, and he was charged with what was it?
Attempted murder.
Second-degree murder. Yeah. The first one, he was charged with 2 felony counts of first-degree assault and armed criminal action. That was the 10 to 30-year sentence. You know, the second case does seem. I don't want to say where I don't know if it's the differences between the criminal statutes in New York versus Missouri that account for the murder charge or some of the factual differences in the case. Where I think perhaps them being in the car farther away, farther from the house gives them less.
It's even
cause.
More removed from. Right. Again, you just described something. I mean, also, ringing the doorbell of the wrong house is a common experience. I did that. I did that last week. I went to someone's house to record a video for their YouTube show, their podcast thing, and I rang the doorbell of the house next door.
Yeah, I just watched
that's something
a viral TikTok a few days ago that was funny because a woman thinks she's going to her friend's house. She rings the doorbell and is like making goofy noises and singing goofy songs and being like a goofball. Turns out it's the wrong house and she's so embarrassed and she goes next door, but it's caught on the Amazon Ring, so everybody laughs at how cringe and embarrassing it is to act out in front of a stranger. That could have been a very tragic outcome had she had a neighbor like either of these men who have now shot and one killed a young woman who was simply out trying to enjoy an evening with her friends.
Yes, I'm not squeamish about this at all. Prosecute people who misuse firearms.
Yeah, I will say,
I absolutely want them prosecuted.
There is an image in America that I don't know if it exists in other countries of someone coming out on their porch with a gun, kind of a get off my lawn. It's the kind of image that we parody in our cartoons, Courage the Cowardly Dog or whatever. Like there's a motif that you see in American pop culture. And I think it is distinctly American. And I wonder if this is a moment for us to consider whether the expectation that in this country people are kind of standing guard, military style, with weapons of death on their front porches as a first response to people who would come into their personal space is contributing to an atmosphere where these kind of events kind of uniquely are taking place in our country. I think.
Well, I mean, that image exists with firearms because this country, or the West of this country, was settled and civilized at a time when firearms were available in more recent history than England or Europe. I mean, there are bands of marauding, roving hordes throughout Europe for like 2,000 years. We don't have that image because it's more distant.
And
this was a more recent memory.
Access to firearms.
Right. I mean, they had swords and spears, and a lot of people died very horrifically.
And this is the year of our Lord, 2023, in upstate New York and Kansas City, Missouri. And it's worth having a conversation about, are these men from a different generation? Is this unlikely to happen going forward? One was in his 80s, one was in his 60s. That's a generation apart. And does there need to be a substantive conversation about how to affect the behavior a priori? Because it's not clear to me that simply prosecuting people after the fact is going to put people in a different posture to not be quite so quick to want to pull the trigger on friends and neighbors and members of our own communities.
Yeah, well, I don't know what laws exist to restrict older people when they're starting to kind of lose it from driving. That would be another one, right? How do you?
Sure.
I mean, old people crash their cars all the time.
The man who murdered Gillis was in his 60s, though. Not exactly the age at which I think a lot of people would be comfortable having age restrictions, just basic age restrictions, not senility or other things, age restrictions on firearm sales. So it's a very difficult question. I'm sure we'll continue to talk about it as these cases and regretfully others progress. We'll have more Rising for you right after this.